An Iranian professor that we kept moving, that they kept moving the event for, that was supposed to be here, but unfortunately he couldn't make it.
We actually do have a girl here from Palestine, but well, she was born in the United States, but she gets a little shy. But if you guys encourage her, maybe she'll speak.
Can I say something? You know, 70% of Palestine was given to the Hashemites. You know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. Okay. Palestine is a much larger region. It was usually was part of Syria for a very long time. But 70% of Palestine in the 1920s was given to the warlords from Saudi Arabia. The 70% of Jordan is Palestinian. And from my perspective, it's being occupied by dispossessed Saudis, the Hashemites, who have no reason to be there. First of all. Second of all, I'm saying that the regional solution has to include the nationalistic problems created by the British, by the creation of Jordan, and the division of the Palestinian people in half. Second of all, from 1948 to 1967, the Hashemites occupied what we call the West Bank now, and they did nothing to create a Palestinian state. Nothing. And there was no intifada, and the other Arab countries were not pressuring Jordan to create a Palestinian state. All of a sudden, once Israel gets it, suddenly the Palestinians are important to the Arab world. But as long as a fellow Muslim was controlling them, they didn't seem to have an issue. How do you explain that? Is it wrong for the Hashemites to thwart Palestinian rights and give them a pass? And when the Israelis do it, suddenly it's wrong. I think from a historical perspective, you have a very slanted point of view. It wasn't just Zionists who were destroying the Palestinians' aspirations. It was colonial stooges on the Arab side that did it as well.
Like for Columbus and the Pilgrims. What about us? We're occupiers of Native American people.
I'm giving it back.
I'd like to say, I think this raises this valid issue of we are all migrants. And the only ultimate solution is when we know we are all migrants and we are all human beings and we are all of one tribe and one nation, a human nation. And until we can start having that kind of identification, we're going to have these silly struggles about borders and names and it's mine and it's yours, and we're going to be like kids fighting over toys in a sandbox.
Well,
so we have to learn to share and care. Yes.
What are we doing to the land here? The industrial, the toxins, the pollution. I just spent 2 months on a Navajo reservation, and people are in tears because of what we're doing to the land that they love before that they've taught 7 generations into the future. If we're not going to live like they live, we come over here from Europe, polluted that place, now we're polluting this place. I mean, this is what we got to think about. We got to live like the people that are living here for thousands and thousands of years.
Calusas were very messy Indians.
That's why they're
You
all
see
dead.
the junk the Calusas left behind them?
What?
The Calusas were absolutely horrible on the environment.
Oh, you got the evidence of that?
Yes, their mouths are everywhere.
We're trash.
They left their trash everywhere.
Also, just to be respectful to everybody, if you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand and I will call on you. So just so we can give each speaker respect that they deserve. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Stan Andrews, and I'm just thinking after listening to the panel presentation and some of the comments, hopefully we're going to have possibly a renewed and expanded environment for debate in another week or so. I'm not going to get into historical tit and tat, and I realize that everybody sitting on that panel, I'm sure, has very good reasons and why they feel the way they do. But I'm more interested in what is the future for America's foreign policy in the Middle East when we get some change from this administration over the past 10 years, which also has an impact on how we view immigrants right here at home and why we don't understand that the Muslim community in Detroit should have been involved in a lot of our political process this time around. So what are the opportunities that are coming up the road in a few weeks for coming up with a much better process than the fatally flawed thing we call a foreign policy in the Middle East, where this last administration wasn't even engaged in Israel until the last few months?
Is this question addressed to all speakers?
Because of the change that we get. The change we need.
I'd like to comment on that, along with what Bruce said. The younger generation, I made a decision of why I'm supporting Barack Obama on the generational issue. The younger people, many of who are here tonight, have grown up in an interconnected world. They're seeing the world every day on television. They are communicating with the world on the internet. They have a whole different mindset from us old fogies from World War II and Korean War and Vietnam War and all of those wars that we've been dealing with. They are not all seeing things the same way that our generations have done. And Barack Obama, I feel, is a person who also sees this opportunity that you're speaking of, this great opportunity to formulate a new way of doing things in the world, where it isn't necessary to bomb first and then ask what went wrong second. I think he brings a new perspective. I think our younger generation, I'm so excited that finally they're getting involved, they're becoming a part of things. For a long time I felt it was just us grannies that were out on street corners worried about these things with our little signs out there, end the war, let's have some peace. Hey, the kids are getting excited now. And I think that's wonderful because that has given me more hope than anything that's happened in the last 40 years. And I want to thank the young people for that.
Yeah, I just want to say one quick word. I was very heavily involved in the anti-war movement when we had one back in 2001, 2002, and 2003. And in 2004, we suspended the anti-war movement so that the anti-war forces could invest all of our energies in getting John Kerry elected, which was particularly absurd because not only because he didn't get elected, but because he was a pro-war candidate. So one thing I'll say, I don't want to dampen anyone's enthusiasm. We're all going to be happy. I'm going to be happy next week if all of our votes in Florida don't end up in a dumpster. But Obama should get elected. But I do just want to say a word of warning, especially to you younger folks. That sound like the old sage. But I've been around just long enough that I've seen, I lived through the Bill Clinton era. I think Obama, I have a little more hope in Obama than I ever did for Clinton. But I do just think that, I'm just saying, let's not put all our hopes in that. The real hope in the world to me is what I see the few days I spent in Israel talking with human rights activists, both Palestinians and Israelis, the experiences I've had in activism in this country. When I see some activism being rekindled by Angela Nile and other people here who are campaigning against Amendment 2 and things like that, to me it's that kind of activism and building bridges and educating people and getting people mobilized that I think really is the way forward to changing this society for the better and to making some beneficial impact in the world.
I must tell you that, can we speak freely? There are no cameras, are there?
1, 2, 3.
Why not have good amendments of this country?
Yeah, well, I watched this on YouTube in the morning. We have to get the evangelical Christian community out of the mix. Out of the mix. You know, the Jews of America are not we are the fly on the rump of the political process. We are nothing. There are not many of us. and those who are involved are very assimilated. The 30 or 40 million evangelicals who have a very unhealthy view of all of this are promoting a kind of end-of-days vision where for them having an apocalyptic showdown on the plains of Armageddon is something much to be desired. So what the hell interest do they have in making peace in the Middle East? Their perspective is let's bring it on. And as soon as we get that political force out of the White House and out of the State Department, we have reason to hope for some progress. And I am hopeful about that.
Bruce, I think we have to bring them into the mix by giving them the genuine message of Jesus, which was not about war. It was about peace. It's about peace and forgiveness, not killing.
You know, one thing that we really have to do is we have to recognize, as Dr. Cox pointed out, that as John pointed out, that you know, every 4 years we go through this where we invest all our hope in the presidential election, and we think suddenly we have this new savior, regardless of who it is in the 4 years, it's going to solve all our problems. And if Barack Obama does get elected, that's going to open a lot of doors for us initially. If we have a black man named Barack Hussein Obama, a lot of people around the world are going to look at the United States in a different light. But it doesn't end there. We have to stay involved. We have to stay engaged in the process. We have to not only be involved in the political process, but as activism. And we have to promote the idea of human unity. Right now, this idea is kind of being, I think, overwhelmed by the economic problems that we're having, the foreign policy problems that we're having, that it's a difficult subject to bring up. But I think the area is going to change one way or the other. We just have to keep the pressure up. We have to keep it going.
First of all, I would like to say that I'm an evangelical Christian, and that Barack Obama is an evangelical Christian, and I actually, he is, and I actually grew up in, I'm a liberal now, but I still believe in Jesus, and I am a member of COPING. There are active war activists in this area. I didn't wear a shirt, I'm sorry. Yeah. But I did grow up in Jerry Falls Church. I went to his school, his middle school, his high school, his college. My dad was his landscaper. He was over at the house, etc., etc. And I do understand that is what you're talking about, the agents of intolerance or whatever. And my question was for you. You talked about the pro-Israel thing, and still, even though I'm sort of out of that world, I still get inundated with pro-Israel this, pro-Israel that, blah, blah, blah. What do you think that we could redirect our focus to instead of just this pro-Israel, blah, blah, blah stuff?
I think Israel is largely capable of handling her own affairs. I think we should really direct ourselves towards issues within the United States. I'm not an isolationist. I don't believe in that. I'm kind of a one-worlder like Joyce here. It's a generational thing. But I can tell you that if we were to, as people who love Israel, if we were to encourage our country, our government not to love Israel to death, Israel would have let me give you an example, and then I'll shut up. The Hezbollah war a couple of years ago. That was done from the basement of the White House. It was not, Israel had no interest whatsoever on her own to engage Hezbollah. You had Cheney with the shock and awe, which is what Israel was told to do over Lebanon, which she did horrifically. Condoleezza Rice every day was telling Israel how close to the Litani River to come and how far. So Israel was in a schizophrenic, impossible situation. Moving troops, moving it back. That's what I mean by loving Israel to death. If we pulled back and let Israel solve her own problems with the Middle East, I think she'd have a better chance. That's what I think. I don't know if that's answering your question.
Yeah, but where can they redirect the energy to instead of?
Which is who's we and where?
My people. My parents.
I am so encouraged. I'm so encouraged when I read about how the evangelical movement is redirecting itself towards the stewardship of God's planet.
Care of creation. Yeah.
It's becoming green, and it's becoming social justice. Because I know the beginnings of the evangelical movement were not apocalyptic. They were largely a social justice issue in the 19th century. It was a populist social justice issue that was hijacked in the same way Islam was hijacked by extreme elements, which I think if they, both sides would do better to regain their heritage. So I think that the stewardship issues are where it should. It's the direction it's going in now, if I'm not mistaken.
I can tell you though, just real quick, the whole revelation issue of the coming in the end times, every time something happens, every war, everyone says, like my mother or something will say, oh, well, that's part of Revelation. And that's where that whole coming of the end time is. So they think that anything happening against Israel and over in that region is where, like, the Antichrist and all that stuff is supposed to happen. So that's why.
Well, you know, my people actually wrote that thing in Aramaic. And we're so surprised where it ended up.
Yeah.
It wasn't meant for you guys anyway. It wasn't meant for you Gentiles. Dump your book. It's not your book.
I will vote for Obama, but I was very distressed to hear him say that as we draw down from Iraq, we will put more troops in Afghanistan. And he said, we must win in Afghanistan. So my question is really to Barack Obama, if he were here, just what the hell do you mean by winning in Afghanistan? What is U.S. policy over there? Are we supposed to kill everybody until those remaining will do what the U.S. tells them to do? Is that what U.S. policy is in Afghanistan?
I think they need to refocus on the original mission, get Osama and be done with it. And that's not a military thing of bombing a whole country or two countries. It's getting your intelligence people and special ops forces and go get them.
Hey, I'll just say one word on it. Yeah, I'd suggest, because there's, you know, for lack of time, a couple books that are very good. Anything by Ahmed Rashid. He wrote a book called, I think, just called The Taliban, subtitle something or other. It's very good. John Pilger is a journalist from England, from Australia, and works in England, who's done a lot of good work. His most recent book is called Freedom Next Time. It has an excellent, very long chapter in Afghanistan. If you read that and read some of these things, you'll find that what U.S. policy has done to Afghanistan is on a par with what U.S. policy has done toward Iraq on the level of criminality and inhumanity and cynicism. And at every turn back in the 80s and early 90s, the Americans and the British would say, proclaim, we're not going to forget you this time, we're going to come in with aid. Then once the issue is off this radar screen a little bit, then that aid disappears completely. And so, and as Joyce pointed out earlier, it's people like this Dostum and Khan, the other most loathsome criminals who walk the earth are the real rulers of Afghanistan today, while Karzai, who's surrounded by 25 big, beefy American security guys, is barely even the mayor of Kabul. So anyway, I just think that we need to educate ourselves more about Afghanistan and not fall prey. Oftentimes, I hear liberal and anti-war people who fall into this argument: oh, Afghanistan is not as bad as Iraq, and it's the good war and stuff like this. So anyway, I think that we need to really be more vigilant and more educated about what's going on in Afghanistan.
And there's one thing, just very quickly, I would add. I was also, I have the same question about exactly what our mission goals are. I would encourage everybody to take a closer look at what General Petraeus is putting out right now, because his take is much more reasonable and much more nuanced than what we've seen coming out of the administration.
Hi, this is for any of you guys. The real core of this conflict, and probably every conflict everywhere, is a matter of ignorance. And it's a lot easier to explain why ignorance exists in war-torn areas in the Middle East or Somalia and all these places. It's a lot easier to explain away why these people hate us so much, but it's a lot harder to explain why the level of ignorance exists at such a high level here in America. And I feel like the only people to blame is our media and our government, who fail on a daily basis to represent us in any sort of realistic way on every level. I can't find a show I want to watch. I can't pick a candidate that represents me. It's like always choosing the lesser of two evils. And there's only two parties that exist. But really, I just feel like everything that we get here is so force-fed and BS to us, and there's really no excuse for it other than this kind of need to expand our capitalistic, our need for money, versus they have the very real survival instinct of when you're pushed to the limit, it's much more understandable why you would accept very ignorant statements, say these type of things, versus we have really no real excuse other than the day-to-day harassment that we receive.
Absolutely. I've got nothing to add.
I hope this can be answered in 30 seconds. About the Trans-Afghan pipeline, how did that fit into the progression of the changes in our attitude towards the Afghan tribal leaders?
What about the pipeline? How does that fit into? Toward the end of your question, about how it fits in with
the way we treat the Afghan tribal leaders and how we're treating Afghanistan as a nation.
How the desire for this pipeline fits in
how
with.
did that fit into?
Well, I think we have to recognize, somebody mentioned about our inconsistency of our policies and what we care about. One of our people mentioned, why don't we care about this and why don't we care about that? We care selectively about various parts of the world based on our perceived self-interest. Sometimes our perceptions are not very good. In the case of Afghanistan and Pakistan, when Russia controlled Central Asia, they wanted the corridor and they wanted to control it so that they had a warm water port to serve the Asian area for their oil exports. Then when the Soviet Union collapsed and Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, all these countries became independent, America says, aha, opportunities. So we backed the Taliban just for order because we wanted to bring a pipeline down. So out of the Central Asian oil fields, to bring it through Afghanistan, through Pakistan to the Indian Ocean. So now we don't care much about what's happening in Darfur. We don't care much about what's happening to the Somalians except as it affects the coastal areas and the piracy. There's so many areas, the Democratic Republic of Congo, terrible things going on there. We don't care because they don't really have anything that matters that much to us. But we're not unique in that. Every country pursues its own self-interest as it sees it. Some administrations see better than others.
I think part of the pipeline issue is the amalgamation of multinational corporations with our government. And that has been something that has forced a lot of this upon us. Not just our government alone, but the amalgamation of multinational corporations becoming a major part of our government.
In fact, Condoleezza Rice herself, when Chevron was involved in some of the negotiations in Afghanistan.
It was Hamid Karzai's former employer.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. In fact, yeah, the U.S. would probably have a better reputation around the world if it would drop the hypocrisy and just say our foreign policy is based on a quest for control of the world's resources instead of just based on democracy and human rights.
I've heard that many times from people from other countries, and they will, in Iran and others, they say, just admit it and we can live with it, but don't act holier than thou about human rights and democracy and all these other issues. If you want to support your dictator for your own reasons, do it, but don't play let's pretend we care about these other things. It's a hypocrisy that upsets them.
Wait, there's a couple other people that want to switch to speak.
I do have a couple of questions. Number one, we have our own resources, but our government just doesn't want to tap into them. Number two,
if you're going to negotiate with Iran, because I'm also assuming you're going to have to negotiate from strength with the same principles as Ronald Reagan, which is to initiate a zero option, the same way if you look at the same way that he dealt with the Soviet Union, you're probably going to have to deal with the same way with Iran. If you want to negotiate, fine, but you're going to have to make concessions to disarm. And one thing that I find unique about Barack Obama is that he has a very, somewhat of a weak view of history, in which he just felt that, as a statesman, you could just sit down and talk with anybody. But, and he mentioned Ronald Reagan during one of the Democratic debates, and one thing that he forgets is that Ronald Reagan initiated the zero option, which is that the Soviet Union has to disarm for any negotiations to take part. And when confronted with this, when a news reporter said, your relations with the Soviet Union are at an all-time low, and he basically said the fact he never had a relationship with the Soviet Union. They're a bunch of liars, cheaters, and criminals.
Well, that's because he doesn't have the foreign policy experience
But it worked.
of Sarah Palin, who learned quite a bit from gazing over the street.
I don't want to go.
I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. We've only got 4 days to make fun of her. We've only got a few days to make fun of her.
But I agree, we do have to negotiate from a position of strength. However, I think one of the things that a lot of people from one side of the political spectrum often overlook about Ronald Reagan is that Ronald Reagan knew when to talk. He knew when to be tough, and he knew when to talk, and eventually he did talk to Mikhail Gorbachev. There was no unilateral disarmament on the side of the Soviets when he opened the relationship with Gorbachev.
And he walked away from the deal from Iraq, you think?
Now, what I would say, very quickly, if I could.
Yeah.
Very, very quickly. What I would say, we have an opportunity with Iran, and 6 months, and 6 months after our first inauguration, they have a presidential election. My tact would be that what we need to do is we need to start opening backdoor channels and low-level negotiations with Iran, and we need to make it clear that we have a real problem with Ahmadinejad, and that it might be easier for the United States to deal with Iran if they had a more liberal president, because they have in the past. And I think we don't want to actually manipulate their election. But, I mean, we do have a responsibility to state our position. And once we have a change of power here and a change of power in Iran, I think negotiations will be much simpler.
Ahmadinejad has nothing to do with the nuclear program or the defense posture of Iran. That is controlled by the Ayatollahs and the Religious Council. He's simply a super mayor. We think of him as the boogeyman, but he has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the issues about Iran that disturb us. He's just an outcast.
I find it interesting. The Iranian issue.
There are other people who wish to speak.
I have met on a large number of occasions with ambassadors, a foreign minister, and various consuls and diplomats from Iran while I was living in Pakistan for many years. I also met the foreign minister at a conference of Islamic countries in Turkey when I went there. And every time I talked with these people, I asked them, why can't Iran and America start talking again? And I compared them with children that got into a fight and both went home and said, we're never going to play with each other again. But they do. And haven't enough years gone by. And in every single instance, the people I was talking with said they wanted to talk and improve relations with the United States. They had a long history of friendship with the United States. One of the things they said one time, they loved the Taliban because it made them look very progressive in comparison. They're quite a cultured people, and they aren't the great devil and demon that we see them, just as we are not the great Satan that some of them say we are. So there's a lot of hope, and they have made many initiatives, and they cited very many examples of talking to European countries that they wanted to work through them. And in every instance, we said no, except for Bud McFarlane and Oliver North during the famous Iran-Contra episode. And I talked with Bud McFarlane